Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time, I'd like to talk about the international environment for brand promotion. Here's the learning objectives for this time. Um, we're going to identify the audience research that contributes to understanding the cultural barriers to communication, and then some of the challenges for integrated marketing communication, uh, and then compare the different types of agencies and so forth that can help you that are out there for us when we want to do some international promotion. And then a brief look at advantages and disadvantages of globalized versus localized promotional campaigns. So the first thing we want to understand about doing promotions, particularly if we're in a foreign market, is we really need to pay attention to culture. Now, when you do an international brand promotion, you have to pay attention that the cultural factors here are going to probably be different than they are in your own national markets. And we see that when we look back at the history of branding, some of these early marketing efforts really were taking home country ads, translating them almost literally into a country's language and just playing the same ads in another place. It was a massive failure that took some time to correct and to get it right. Quite often, things don't translate inadvertently, and words that mean one thing in one language and in one culture mean something completely different in another. And so quite often these early branding promotions were considered offensive, and they often were had to do a lot of recalls and apologies, and they were failed efforts simply because didn't take the time to understand the cultural factors. Today's message is much more rooted in understanding culture, and so that they are indeed understand the values and so forth are understood and respected by marketers. Now we have either local brands or we can have global brands, and we don't have nearly as many global brands. Those are the ones whose messages seem to be the same no matter where you are in the world. For instance, flying in airplanes is the same experience, more or less, wherever you go in the world. The same with drinking coffee. So when you advertise an airline, you can more or less use the same ads with a change of language, of course, and stress whatever benefits or whatever it is, or we can make whatever comparisons, and not have to invent from whole cloth a complete new marketing campaign. And the same with coffee. For instance, Starbucks is a great example of that. Starbucks is pretty much has the same menu everywhere it goes in the world, the same pricing status and tiers, and so forth. And it works quite well for them because everybody knows what coffee is around the world, and it may be enjoyed in different ways, but Starbucks produces the same product for every region that it goes to. Well, we just want to make sure and be certain when we're putting together our promotional campaigns that we're paying attention to these cultural factors. Some of the ways things get in the way, ethnocentrism, of course. This is the view that your culture is better than anybody else's and that yours is superior. And this is really a sort of a chip on the shoulder sort of cultural stance that some places take. It is hard to deal with ethnocentrism. And certainly if you're marketing in a culture that is rife with it, you must be careful what products and services you're offering that do not offend what's going on currently in the socio-cultural sphere of that market. You use really to understand these cultural sort of characteristics. This is self-reference criterion, SRC. And what this means is each individual in any given culture is going to refer back to their own prior experiences with products and services and so forth, and use that as the basis to make decisions on future product and services that you might use. And this is all rooted in culture, and many of the things that you're using as evaluative criteria, this is a good deal, this is a bad deal, this is something I like or I don't like, might be just rooted in culture somehow. We have to be smart. We've gotten smart over time by doing this cross-cultural audience research. And you have to do this on every country or region that you plan to do a promotional campaign. Then you've got to do marketing research. Now you can get a lot of help. As it says here, the International Trade Administration will publish all sorts of reports. These are available online. Most of the time, these things are free. You can also go to places like the US government, for instance, the CIA World Factbook. You can go there, and every year they update their information on countries, regions, industries, and you can get incredible snapshots of different things that are going on in any of those places. This is audience research. Now, what we do know by doing this sort of research is less developed countries represent about three quarters of the world's population, but they do not have the consumer uh, wherewithal to actually participate in most of the marketing efforts that are happening around the world in more developed countries. And so in these sorts of societies, the great majority of consumers would like these products. They simply don't have the money or the means to get them. And so the products that are offered in these markets are often not related to consumer products like we tend to see in our own market here, but they're markets related to infrastructure. So they're building supply materials and construction materials and indeed equipment and tools and things like that. Now, when we get to these countries that have just newly become industrialized, they're just climbing out of that developmental stage where they're getting to the next stage and developing their own industries and so forth, they are undergoing a change. They may be developing a middle class that's a consumer class that can afford to buy your product or service or whatever. That is always a challenge to communicate with that group. Because it just depends on what infrastructure they have that allows you to access them. If they don't have good internet in the country, regardless of how many people have cell phones, you won't be able to do much with advertising. But if the internet is strong and the more people that have mobile devices and so forth, you have a chance to reach them with your communication messages. Your audience research of markets available to you around the world ought to include these factors, and these are the things that you'll be looking at. So you want to, in other words, the same thing you're doing in the national markets is understand the wants and needs of customers who are in different economic situations in different places around the world. Now, when you get to the mature economy countries and the ones that are highly industrialized, the US, Canada, UK, Australia, Japan, and so forth, these are places where they have large middle classes that have higher GDP per capita. That means their income is higher per individual in all those countries. And that means they have some money. And if their income per capita, for their income, their disposable income in particular amounts to anything, then you can market to them. And so you pay attention to the unique factors that exist around the world that are cultural and those that are lifestyle and so forth. And that's all part of your cross-cultural audience research. Be savvy about where you're going and what you're going to do. So this audience research is going to involve a lot of demographic information most of the time. And you're going to find that there are vast differences and also some similarities in markets, in the size of the population, those key trends and so forth that are happening there. How old are the people? Is it a growing population? What is the income distribution? What's the literacy rate? What's the household size? Well, these things, when you know them, pay off what's called the demographic dividend. In other words, if you find enough of the factors that seem to indicate that you can fulfill that need and want, you can indeed reach consumers who can afford to buy your product or service, then you're on the plus side already. That means it's a favorable area and so forth. You have to take into account the values, the customs and rituals that are going on in this market and so forth. And never ignore anything significant that's going on in that culture, particularly religious practices. You simply want to know everything that you can to avoid offending people. Remember, your marketing methods aren't going to change much. Be simple, be direct, be consistent, be truthful. So product use and preferences. The major markets that are out there are already heavily researched with this audience research. You don't have to redo all that research. Go online, find reports, find the most recent reports, and get your marketing knowledge up to date. That's the easiest way to do it. But find the most recent articles and so forth you can. Run some Google Trends on recent articles and things that are happening in that region so that you really feel like you're savvy about what's going on. Remember, things can change anywhere in the world, and in some worlds, places in the world, indeed, things can change much more quickly, really, than we would like them to or than we were expecting. And then be careful. Use the tools that are out there. Don't have a costly translation error that comes back to haunt you, that if, you know, your inattention to this detail, a simple one of translation of, oh, in our culture, this means something quite positive and very benign. And you've done the impossible in that culture, and you've done a thing that offends just about everybody, or you've used very poor taste. So there are challenges, particularly those cultural ones. When it comes to choosing a media channel, you're going to be challenged as well, because like I said about infrastructure, areas are going to vary depending on their economic status and that classification, their level of infrastructure, and all of these things. So the availability of media and their coverage matters, and you need to research it and so forth. And you've got to know what are the major subcultures within this national region that I'm going to for the first time. No region is a monolith in itself for most places in the world. There are always other regions, subcultures, and language complexities that you have to deal with. Remember, these regions, these submarkets within larger regions have their own newspapers quite often, their own television and radio stations and so forth. That's the things, those are the types of information that you want to gather so that you can put together a sound and reasonable promotional campaign. And so some of this media exists across borders and so forth. They have resources also that you could tap into, but these might be places where you could reach the demographic audience that you have decided through analysis is your target segment. So the BBC and CNN are good examples. They're all international media outlets that reach a wide variety of places around the world. But costs and pricing vary tremendously as well. So you've got to do your homework on that. Some markets just aren't going to let you in, believe it or not. It's not like here, where if you've got money and you meet some basic requirements, you can run an ad. Well, that's not true in all markets around the world. So you've got to find out what is the nature of getting in. And it might be that those media channels are controlled by some powerful interest, and they want to put their stamp on it, their spin, or they want to get some benefit themselves through negotiating with you to allow you access. There may not be any other way to get into some markets without going through this process. The thing is, do your homework, do your research, do your cross-cultural research, and find out. There's nothing more important than doing that. You're going to run into regulatory challenges in the international environment, just like in your own national environment. And they are many, and they are varied. Some reflect simply the diversity of their market and their cultural values. Others are quite restrictive because their tone is intended to protect local economies or industries in some way that maybe you don't understand or fathom. And there are real differences in policy in some areas of the world. For instance, the United States marketing practices versus the EU marketing practices. Just as an aside here, the practices on privacy are quite different. US marketers build a database, like we've often talked about, of characteristics of the individual consumer. And they build that database over time with everything you've ever purchased and so forth. And that data is processed and sold to other marketers. You go to the EU, they frown on that. The information about any individual consumer, that private information of name, contact information, what they bought, and all of that cannot be kept according to the general policy in EU, and I'm paraphrasing here. And so American companies are constantly being fined because they sign agreements to operate within the EU trade union, and they violate them by keeping this information and then continuing to market to these people in the future. And it's quite obvious they're doing it because they have marketing information that they're not supposed to have. So you should avoid that. Again, we're crossing an ethical line that we shouldn't. And so we've got to be careful, the use of a national symbol, there could be taxes on your advertisements. There are going to be all kinds of challenges. And again, you've got to do your homework to be prepared for this sort of thing. Now, it's nothing wrong with using an ad agency. And indeed, there are many very reputable international ad agencies. The thing, though, is like anything, it's buyer beware. Do your homework, negotiate, contact, investigate, and find out all what's going on about reputation of the agency, what people have said about them, what do you feel about it after you've analyzed everything, how do they stack up and compare to what other agencies are offering. And maybe you can find a domestic agency that has a specialty in international marketing. There are plenty available out there. So it's up to you. These global agencies do have a particular expertise often in worldwide affairs, international trade barriers, and things to watch out for, and can really help you with your audience research efforts. Again, if you have an affiliate that you've established in some foreign market, a partnership, a strategic alliance, you can also use them to get that information you need and to help you. And so you can make arrangements once you're in a market with other local agencies and join other networks that are in existence and so forth. So there are plenty of support services out there, other agencies that are out there ready to take your money if you need their help. But you just have to do your investigation and make sure it's really what you want to do and what you want to spend your money on. So local or international, really, either way you go, investigate and choose carefully. Now, let's wrap this up by talking about globalized and localized campaigns, which is part of where I just transitioned from in that last bit there. Globalized campaigns are using really a same message and the same sort of execution across all of the international markets. And the difference would be mainly watching out for cultural barriers and language requirements. But the campaigns might be very similar in a lot of different markets in tone. And that would be kind of the way that you do it in your national market, catering to the different needs and wants and indeed trends and preferences that we find in local regional markets and subcultures and so forth, all those submarkets. So the same thing can be developed over time. A globalized campaign can do that for you. Now, localized campaigns, these might have many different messages, but consistent themes and so forth. And you can do this with a different message in every market if you choose. This is an easy way to go if you find a campaign or you have an ad agency that has a proposal like this, or you come up with one yourself, and it seems appropriate that you could use it across markets, fine. Globalized campaigns are fine. Localized campaigns work too, though. They also cater to the specific idea that every submarket in any given national region is going to be very different, and therefore we've got to come up with a very unique strategy for it. This also works. It just depends. If it is a very unique market, then probably a globalized campaign might not be an appropriate choice there. So you will decide once you begin and finalize that audience research and you start to feel like you know what you need to know about the potential foreign markets that you're thinking of entering into. But you certainly need to know about global trends, what's going on. Well, 5G is here. It's spreading around the world. That is the latest telecommunications trend. It will take some time, particularly in less developed countries. 5G won't happen for a long time. In the newly emerging, just industrialized nations, a little bit of 5G. In mature market economies, a huge push, a competitive push for 5G. Eventually, they will get it within a few years. We're starting to already see the benefits of 5G in the US. It's so new and we don't quite really know all our uses for it yet. And in fact, the consumer market hasn't really figured out everything we can do with 5G just as yet. If we look at just demographics, global youth, they seem to hold similar thought and aspirations around the world. They want a good life, they want to have families, they want success, they want careers, and so forth. These trends are shared universally by the youth of the world. And so there is a basis. There are some major themes in marketing right there. that could be used for appeal. And certainly there are plenty more that you could identify with a more localized demographic look. Americanization of the world continues. This is no idle statement. Americanization has been happening for decades now. And from many perspectives and from many markets in the world, we are the premier innovators of idea and thought, and particularly in entertainment and so forth. And we certainly don't want to lose that. And I think right now, culturally for us, we're sort of at that turning point where we've been the leader for so long in innovation and so forth that we are in danger of not being the leader any longer. And there are forces coming out of our sociocultural sphere pushing to reinvest, as you see with legislative efforts to build infrastructure, to go farther into the future, to do those things that will make us as a nation competitive. So you're looking for those sorts of things around the world. Indeed, those sorts of values and aspirations are shared by the up and coming new generations that will be taking over the world. And it's not just their attitude on what they want from life. The youth of the world, just like here in America, are very concerned about climate change and the impact of policies of business and marketing on these issues that are so important to consumers around the world. And let me just wrap this up by saying that globalization itself is not popular everywhere. There are forces in the US, in the world, that do not believe that free trade is the way to go, that believe that some of the arguments against marketing in general are true, that it's superficial, that it creates materialism, that it creates big gaps between rich and poor and so forth. And there are other reasons, deep-seated reasons, cultural ones, and sometimes others founded in misinformation, honestly. But because of these forces and these thoughts, globalization really isn't embraced by everyone everywhere. So also keep that in mind as you do your audience research and so forth. Okay, folks, that's all I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.